Welcome back, friends. You are listening to the Juicebox Podcast. Welcome to my nutrition series with Jenny Smith. Jenny and I are going to, in very clear and easy to understand ways, walk you from basic through intermediate and into advanced nutritional ideas. We're going to tie it all together with type 1 diabetes, talk about processed foods, and how you can share these simple concepts with the people in your life, whether it's your children, other adults, or even seniors. Besides being the person you've heard on the Bold Beginnings and Pro Tip series and so much more, Jennifer Smith is a person living with type 1 diabetes for over 35 years. She actually holds a bachelor's degree in human nutrition and biology from the University of Wisconsin. She's a registered and licensed dietitian, a certified diabetes educator. She's a trainer on all kinds of pumps and CGMs. She's my friend, and I think you're going to enjoy her thoughts on better eating. Please don't forget that nothing you hear on the Juicebox Podcast should be considered advice, medical or otherwise. Always consult a physician before making any changes to your healthcare plan or becoming bold with insulin. A huge thanks to my longest sponsor, Omnipod. Check out the Omnipod 5 now with my link, omnipod.com/juicebox. You may be eligible for a free starter kit, a free Omnipod 5 starter kit at my link. Go check it out. Omnipod.com/juicebox. Terms and conditions apply. Full terms and conditions can be found at omnipod.com/juicebox. This episode of the Juicebox Podcast is sponsored by US Med, usmed.com/juicebox, or call 888-721-1514. US Med is where my daughter gets her diabetes supplies from, and you could too. Use the link or number to get your free benefit check and get started today with US Med. I'm having an on-body vibe alert. This episode of the Juicebox Podcast is sponsored by Eversense 365, the only 1-year wear CGM. That's one insertion and one CGM a year. One CGM, 1 year. Not every 10 or 14 days. EversenseCGM.com/juicebox. All right, Jenny, we are up to module 5. Look at, we're rolling right along.
Woohoo! I don't even know how many modules there are. What do we have, 8?
I don't know. I thought it was 6. It's a list. Don't worry. For the people listening,
don't worry.
It's written down. I was thinking today that I genuinely like doing these things with you because, yes, it's a module, right? But we have stuff here that we want to talk about. But the conversation, it's very organic still. And I think that's hopefully leading to value for the people listening, that they can just kind of hear us talking through it and not just be, I don't know, like saying like, here's the bullet points and these are the things you have to do. And the reason I even bring that up is I was listening to an episode of the podcast today and kind of listening back. It's something I recorded months ago. And there's this mom and she's got 6 kids.
Wow.
And she's an engaged person, like good mom, all that stuff. But she talked about how difficult it is to cook for 8 people.
Yeah.
And she's like, I know that I work out of some packages and I do stuff, but like even financially, like I can't do a piece of meat and 2 vegetables and financially or the time every day. And I thought, so many people have to be in situations like that of some level or another. So my hope is that the conversation just allows people to pull out whatever bit of value they can find to add to how they actually live and what their lives are actually like,
Yeah, no, it's a very valid point to bring up. Again, I've worked with all populations and people of all different, I guess, economic kind of levels, right? Mm-hmm. And we have to take the information that is valuable or most valuable, and we have to find a way to work it in. And down the line then, especially if you live with a chronic condition like diabetes, it does eventually make a big difference in long-term expenditure.
Yeah.
Things that you get away from paying for because you've done the here and now, whether it's with, better food choices or moving your body by taking a walk and you don't have to join a gym or, those kinds of things. But
I started to relate it back into my head the way I think about like diabetes management. Like, here's all the information I know. Your goal's not perfection. Like, some of you will do that. Like, every once in a while, somebody listens. They're like, my A1C is 5. And I just do the stuff you said. I'm like, awesome. Like, that worked out for you. That's great.
Right.
But there are other people who are like, well, I'm 5.5. I'm 6. I'm 6.5. I'm 7. They take the parts that either made sense to them or the parts that they were actually able to incorporate, and they improved, right? Like, they did better for themselves. And I just hope that this kind of works out the same way. Anyway, so module 5, key areas to address in nutritional education for type 1 diabetes. First step here, blood glucose management basics. So take it away.
Yeah. So we started these modules about nutrition and health from a base to finally move into what I think every listener has some tie to type 1 diabetes, right? Or diabetes in general, let's say. So. And those basics, most people realize when we talked about the macro ingredients or the macronutrients, right? The carbs, the proteins, the fats. Building that into diabetes, it starts with understanding those because they impact our blood sugar. Right. And in what way do they impact our blood sugar? Carbs, sugars impact most and most immediately. When we're working it all together, it's kind of like health in general. We sort of compartmentalize a lot of the health things or health conditions when truly they all do impact each other.
Right.
So if you are taking the bases from the nutrition pieces that we've talked through and you're applying them now at the level of diabetes management, hopefully the puzzle is starting to make a picture that's understandable.
Yeah, but there are pieces that are diabetes related, just like we talked about micros and macros. There's also this stuff that we're going to talk about now. And I guess it's stuff that people probably imagine they understand, but I don't know if they've ever had it explained to them the way you're going to. Is that how you feel about it?
Kind of. Yeah. Well, I mean, and when we talk about, blood sugar basics, what are some of the basics? We've got 3 big things in managing blood sugar. We've got food. You get the big one that has been discussed and over talked about is the kind of the really top of the pyramid is understanding your insulin and how it works. But then when we have the foods, we talked about, again, the big nutrients that impact blood sugar, major being carbohydrates, but then the pieces of those carbohydrates that we have to understand timing for. Mm-hmm. And it all works itself together. So anytime we're considering blood sugar in relation to the food that we're eating, we also have to have a defined range. What's the target that you're aiming for? Are you the standard ADA, which is 70 to 180? Do you have a tighter range for that? Do you have a target that's specific to certain variables in your life, such as exercise times or sick day management? Or if you are, more of an aged person or a really, really young person, your targets need to be clearly defined, because then as you work in foods to try to figure out which ones work the best in terms of what I'm aiming for, you have to have the range defined.
Yeah. Well, what range? I mean, I'm happy to share Arden's, but like, what range do you think of?
Yeah. So I always really consider fastings, fasting blood sugar, which we often define as an overnight time, right? We could be fasting sometime else during the day, but overnight is typically what we call fasting. And in that time period, if we're aiming for the range that is for people without diabetes, it's under 100. So if you define something that would be safe, let's call it 80 to 100 or 75 to 100 for that overnight time period. And then in the aftermath of meals, this is again where some definition that's individualized may become beneficial. Again, as you're trying to contain things in the target and in relation to the foods you're trying to figure out.
Right.
So, 180 could be 160, which is more along the lines of what the clinical endocrinology kind of aims for. And then if you're pregnant, it might be under 140 in the aftermath of a meal. So again, defining that as your goal helps you to see whether or not you're meeting it, and your timing and your insulin dosing and this food versus that food are all kind of working out.
For somebody who's had type 1 for many years, who might and probably does remember the ADA telling them like, oh, 200 is good for a spike, or you don't want to go over 250. Like those numbers have been coming down. They come down with technology, right? Like I want people to understand that if you were told a number 20 years ago and today that number is 100 points less and you're like, well, it's okay. They told me before it was okay. Like they told you what they thought the mass public could accomplish with the technology that existed at that time. That's the way I think of it. I don't actually know if that's what's happening, but as technology gets better and there's better measuring and CGMs get better, I see them tightening those tolerances. Do you think I'm right about that?
I think you are, but the underlying there is what? Safety.
Okay, right.
When we didn't have technology, unless like my mom asked for more test strips. There were no CGMs. She asked for more test strips because of the things that I did. Mm-hmm. And we wanted to have more visible what was going on before I went to play, volleyball or whatever it was. And there was, again, a defined range, but we weren't finger sticking every 5 minutes like a CGM can give you at this point.
Yeah.
So I think it boils down to safety. The targets, as you said, can be tighter. Mm-hmm. They can be lower targets. And the value there is we can catch things because of continuous glucose monitors, especially. And now with AID systems or automated insulin delivery systems with algorithms, there's also a safety catch feature there. Not only do you have the visibility of the direction the glucose is going, the value that it's sort of within, but also what has the system been doing to take care of that for us?
Yeah. Yeah, I guess the establishments aren't going to say, even if they knew back then, like, look, you want to be between 80 and 100 overnight. If they didn't think you could do that without getting low, having a seizure, that kind of stuff, no one was going to say that. I have always disliked ordering diabetes supplies. I'm guessing you have as well. It hasn't been a problem for us for the last few years, though, because we began using US Med. You can too. usmed.com/juicebox or call 888-721-1514 to get your free benefits check. US Med has served over 1 million people living with diabetes since 1996. They carry everything you need, from CGMs to insulin pumps and diabetes testing supplies and more. I'm talking about all the good ones, all your favorites. Libre 3, Dexcom G7, and pumps like Omnipod 5, Omnipod DASH, Tandem, and most recently, the iLet pump from Beta Bionics. The stuff you're looking for, they have it at US Med. 888-721-1514 or go to usmed.com/juicebox to get started now. Use my link to support the podcast. That's usmed.com/juicebox or call 888-721-1514. This episode of the Juicebox Podcast is sponsored by Eversense 365. And just as the name says, it lasts for a full year. Imagine for a second a CGM with just one sensor placement and one warm-up period every year. Imagine a sensor that has exceptional accuracy over that year and is actually the most accurate CGM in the low range that you can get. What if I told you that this sensor had no risk of falling off or being knocked off? That may seem too good to be true, but I'm not even done telling you about it yet. The Eversense 365 has essentially no compression lows. It features incredibly gentle adhesive for its transmitter. You can take the transmitter off when you don't want to wear your CGM and put it right back on without having to waste the sensor or go through another warm-up period. The app works with iOS and Android, even Apple Watch. You can manage your diabetes instead of your CGM with the Eversense 365. Learn more and get started today at eversensecgm.com/juicebox. 1 year, one CGM.
Correct. Right. And we had old insulins. When I was diagnosed, I used a cloudy insulin called L or Lente, and I used R insulin, which is that longer, as close to rapid as we had at that point, right?
Yeah.
Mixed them together. You're really only taken twice a day. Right. It was a very defined, structured daily life compared to today's flexibility because of the technology we have and the safety that brings along with it.
I just think it's good to recognize that while we're talking about it because, to your point, I used to say like, hey, I need more test strips. And at one point they'd say, why do you need so many? And I was like, well, because I'm testing her blood sugar. They didn't even expect that. Like, you know what I mean? You get like a little bottle with 50 strips in it. And I'd say, well, that's 5 days maybe. And they were like, no, 5 days? That should last you 2 months. Aren't you just testing 3 times a day? And I was like, how's that going to help us? When I think back on like early ads that I used to do for Dexcom, like how like much we were saying, like, you can actually see the direction and speed your blood sugar is falling. Like that was a completely different idea at that point, you know?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And again, that safety piece is that it's the kind of bottom line. I just did a Breakthrough T1D Summit presentation, and the keynote speaker was a phenomenal guy who was diagnosed as a kid. He was a competitive swimmer, had no CGM when he was diagnosed either. I think he said that their prescription for test strips was like 25 test strips a day. Yeah. My max, I believe, if I remember, was like 18 or something like that.
You were testing that frequently.
For testing and getting enough information. But God, like 25 tests a day to be able to have swim for 4 hours and be able to do it the right way with safety and everything in the picture. And there we had no technology to help.
So I'm just going to leave this for people listening. Like, please don't just test at the times of day that you know your blood sugar is going to be good. Right. Yeah, like so that you can go, I don't know what happened. I got 85, I got 120, and I got 113. It was awesome. Because you do, I have a lot of conversations with people, and they'll say things like, I don't test my blood sugar every day, or I don't have a CGM, or I have a CGM, but I turned off the alarms, like that kind of thing. Like, well, then, okay. The same as nutrition. You can be doing something today that is not valuable for your health, that isn't going to make you fall over dead. That doesn't mean it's not worth not doing, I guess.
Right.
Yeah, changing. Anyway.
Well, and with this technology, what does it roll into? It rolls into understanding not only the food that we eat, but the timing of the insulin for that food, right? Tell me, what's the role of insulin in the body, Scott?
Oh, well, hold on a second. There's something about a key and some blood and like, Jenny, I forget how you explained it to me that one time, but it's helping the regulation of the glucose in and out of your bloodstream.
In and out of the cells.
Yeah, the cells. Thank you.
Yep, absolutely. You get sugar, your body digests, does a whole bunch of fancy things, which I wouldn't, describe here, but essentially glucose ends up in your bloodstream. That has to move out, and it has to get to the right places, your cells, to provide fueling.
Mm-hmm. So the insulin lets it go from your blood into the cells where it belongs, so that your body can use it.
Again, it's the lock and key concept, right? Mm-hmm. The doors on the cells are essentially locked. Without insulin, glucose floats around, your blood sugar gets higher and higher in your bloodstream because it has no real ability to get into the cells.
Yeah.
So understanding insulin is valuable then because it moves the food that we eat into the cells for proper fueling. Mm-hmm. And a big piece that we've already talked a bit about in terms of like more processed types of foods and quality types of foods, et cetera, is it leads to the potential for there to be a disruption already in how your body gets energy. But if we have disruptions in then how insulin works, it disrupts the food moving into the right places in our body for us to use.
Yeah.
I'm essentially talking about resistance, right?
Yeah. Okay.
So those pieces, when we're talking about the influence of nutrition on diabetes or blood sugar management, again, it all ties together.
It's almost like you could trick yourself in a number of ways. You could eat very healthy, but not use insulin well, and you still not get the nutrition, the energy that you need. You could also eat poorly and be so great with insulin that you feel like, oh, look how good my blood sugar is. I'm doing great. But now you're just getting the impact of poor nutrition. So
correct. And maybe I would change it there, and maybe not over nutrition, but over the caloric amount that your body needs. There are a lot of people who have way more caloric intake than they need, but they don't have very quality nutrient intake.
Okay.
So that's kind of a fine line to discuss.
What I'm thinking of right now is understanding how important using insulin well is. I see a lot of people think of insulin as it's a cultural, it can be like older ideas maybe. But I hear a fair amount of people say that if you're using insulin, you failed. That's kind of like from the type 2 world. And then that idea is moved into the type 1 world, which is like, well, if you're using too much insulin, you're doing it wrong. It's so hard to talk about I find, for me personally, because I do want people to use the amount of insulin they need. I don't want them,
Correct.
I say this a lot, right? I don't want you having high blood sugars, but I also, once we figured out how to use insulin, I would love it if you ate in a way that wouldn't require a ton of insulin that wouldn't be needed if you were eating in a healthier way. This episode is brought to you by Omnipod. Would you ever buy a car without test driving it first? That's a big risk to take on a pretty large investment. You wouldn't do that, right? So why would you do it when it comes to choosing an insulin pump? Most pumps come with a 4-year lock-in period through the DME channel, and you don't even get to try it first. But not Omnipod 5. Omnipod 5 is available exclusively through the pharmacy, which means it doesn't come with a typical 4-year DME lock-in period. Plus, you can get started with a free 30-day trial to be sure it's the right choice for you or your family. My daughter has been wearing an Omnipod every day for 17 years. Are you ready to give Omnipod 5 a try? Request your free starter kit today at my link, omnipod.com/juicebox. Terms and conditions apply. Eligibility may vary. Full terms and conditions can be found at omnipod.com/juicebox. Find my link in the show notes of this podcast player or at juiceboxpodcast.com.
And there's the no, that's 100% correct. It's I see a common thread online about, my child is 9 years old and they're using this much insulin. How much do your 9-year-olds use? And that should be like a stop right there. Mm-hmm. While there might be a weight-based idea for insulin dosing and approximation within an age range, no similar 9-year-old is going to be that alike in dosing needs. And you defined it well in saying that eat what you need to eat for nutrient value, for caloric, for fueling, for all the activities you want to do. But we can easily these days have more caloric value. And thus now we're using more insulin than we should be using, only because we're putting more food in than we need.
Right. So using more insulin is not the problem. Using more insulin, if you're eating so poorly that you need more insulin, that's the problem. And it's not a thing we say out loud because we try very hard not to tell people how to eat. Listen, it's an edict of mine. It's one of my rules in my Facebook group. Like, don't tell people how to eat. Yeah. Right. But at the same time, we're talking about nutrition right now. So I'm not telling you how to eat, but I am telling you that if you do this, it'll be better for you. And you can do whatever you want. Like, I'm not saying, I think there's a difference. Like, if you want my personal opinion, I think there's a difference between having a bowl of cereal on a Saturday and eating cereal every day all week long, right? Like there's just a difference there. And if you want to know, like, my 9-year-old uses this much, how much does yours use? Well, you got to ask the rest of the question. What does your 9-year-old eat? How active are they? You know what I mean? Like those kinds of things. You can't it's not apples to apples unless you have all the apples.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And, in moving all of the nutrition kind of macronutrient stuff that we've talked about into this now realm of diabetes, it's like the macros do require coverage. Mm-hmm. And here we're talking about insulin. Insulin from carbohydrates, we typically start with an insulin to carb ratio. And figuring that out, defining it really for those who maybe haven't listened or don't realize, we tend to have about 1 unit of insulin that covers a certain number of grams of carb at a particular meal. So if you're a 1 unit for every 10 gram and you have 30 grams of carb, you'll have around 3 units of insulin that you need just for the carbohydrate part of the meal.
Yeah.
And then it becomes deeper, right? The discussions we've had are about what kinds of foods that are carbohydrate are you eating? What's the glycemic nature of those foods? What are the components of the meal? Is it all simple sugar stuff, or are you eating a really big green salad with 2 cups of chopped up non-starchy vegetables on it? Right.
So which by the way still have carbs in it. You just have to know how to count those carbs. Like there are carbs and things that I bet you people don't imagine. And so it's important to count your carbs accurately. Like, right, your insulin to carb ratio obviously needs to be right. But then once you're counting, you can't make a cheeseburger and say, oh, that's meat, because the roll might have high fructose corn syrup in it. It might not. You might put ketchup on it and then just ignore the fact that might be 10 carbs of ketchup. or right, that kind of
Sure.
stuff, or that you put a bunch of cheese on your burger and there's fat in the burger. Like, I'm telling you, you got to bolus differently for a burger made out of 80% lean meat than you do for 90% lean meat, because there's more fat. The fat slows down your digestion. These are the things that I think we do a good job in the Pro Tip series and other places of explaining to people. But your carb count has to be right. Like, if you're eating and you're spiking and you think, I don't understand what happened, it's not a big secret. There's only a couple of things that may have happened. Your settings are wrong, your carb count's wrong, or you don't understand the impact of your food. Maybe if you're a girl, certain week of the month, you might have different resistance. But other than that.
And or different activity levels or, factors there too, or illness. I mean, there are variables that are in the picture or that could be. But in general, if you have these basics of understanding, okay, as much quality kind of food that we put in, what food category do they fit into? Okay, carbs, I'm going to count those as well as I can. There's no 100% perfect on it, right? But what's the nature of them? Are they quality, low glycemic, going to be slower in hitting my blood sugar? Do I have an idea of how to cover them with insulin? And then what are the other parts of the meal? As you said, a burger with cheese. Now we're getting into proteins and fats. And at some point, while protein has minimal effect this goes to what we were talking about, portion, right? Portion controlled, well managed amounts. You should be able to get away with covering carbohydrate at your mealtime and not having to factor in fats and proteins. It's when we end up having a meal that is much more complex in fats and proteins, or much higher, I should say. You haven't miscounted your carbohydrates, but now you've got this problem happening in the aftermath of the meal. And with fats and proteins, it could lead to hours worth of issues that you're seeing. And then it leaves you wondering, well, I thought I counted, the package said, 28 grams of carbohydrate, and that's what I did. And I got low, and now I'm sitting high, and the high won't come down. So there's a deeper level.
I think it's important to realize that if you just randomly think of 5 different foods in your head, rice, bread, I don't know, a fruit, just picture 5 in your head and imagine all of them have been measured perfectly, and they're all 10 grams of carbs, each of your 5 things. Each of those 5 things need a different amount of insulin, very likely, because of the way they impact your body. So if you just ate the fruit and it was 15 carbs of a banana, well, that might be a lot of simple sugar, and you might have to bolus differently for that. If it was bread, it might go in, it might go in your stomach and sit there for a little bit before it goes. So 5 different foods, 5 different impacts, and then you put them all together and stick them in your belly at once.
Right.
5 different impacts and 5 different foods and 5 different timelines that they're going to impact on, and et cetera. And I know that sounds, it can, if you're new,
frustrating.
Oh my God. You're like, well, what am I supposed to do?
Right.
But there is a way to just to kind of simplify it down to well, there's 50 carbs here, but there's some fat, there's some this. So I know I'm going to have to, but there's also simple sugar. So I'll hit it hard at front, but I know an hour from now it's going to start going up again. So I'll make sure that we cover that rise before it happens, and it should be okay. I know that sounds crazy if you don't understand it, but it's not that hard, really.
Well, and when you simplify meals, again, I like to use what eons ago was called the plate method, right? It's the idea of taking a standard size plate, and about 50% of that should be as low glycemic types of vegetables, right? Steamed, grilled, sauteed, salad form, whatever you can kind of fit in. And then the other part of the plate is your proteins, a healthy, nice portion of protein. And then some type of lower glycemic, if possible, carbohydrate. It could be just fruits. It could be, a grain of some kind, or whatever you're choosing to put on your plate there. But in that balance, you're also getting the concept of portion. And then you're also getting a mixed meal that doesn't have such an overload. And you should be able to, in a meal like that, have the insulin to carb ratio truly cover the carbohydrates the way that you would expect them to, and not have this lingering kind of later effect.
Or getting a fat rise later or something like that.
Yeah. Right. If you get fat being that other one, that it really leads to a lot more insulin resistance. I like to think of high fat at a mealtime. And high fat could be still healthy fat. Like you eat 2 avocados, that's a lot of fat, man. It might be good fat for you.
Right.
It's
We're not
still a
going to
lot
argue
of
with
fat.
that. Right.
Right. So what are you going to find? You're going to find in the hours after, you're not going to spike from an avocado, but you're going to require extra insulin. I think of fat kind of like it sits on the insulin in your bloodstream, or it slashes its effect by like 50%, which is the reason eons ago we used to set a temp basal increase on conventional pumps in the aftermath of high fat, a 50% increase for 4 to 6, maybe even 8 hours to compensate for that sensitivity reduction we get from high fat.
Yeah.
So again, it's not so much the quality of the fat here, although that can have other effects, but it is really the portion of it and the potential then that it could require you to do something different in your insulin use.
Good food, good portions, good coverage with your insulin should lead to stability. Let me say this, juiceboxpodcast.com, up at the top, go to guides, fat and protein insulin calculator.
That's a great one. I recommend that one to people all the time.
Thank you. This will take you to a pretty technical overview of how fat and protein can impact your blood sugars, but it also takes you to 4 episodes that discuss it. And I want to just say this, the calculator is not medical advice, and nothing is. Always consult your physician. But I do have a calculator on there that will help you turn grams of fat, grams of protein into a bolus amount to help you. And it discusses there how to do it. If you don't understand how to do it, talk to your doctor about it. But I hope that would help you.
Awesome.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay. What we got anything else on here? Meal planning.
I think we
did
the
we did
meal
good?
planning, I think we kind of talked a little bit about within all of this. Really, it's just, I know with, again, as we go back to that talk about technology that we had early on and the benefit of technology, I think what that has also brought in is flexibility, which can have a positive, but flexibility could also lead to not as much regularity in what you're doing. And that could be detrimental, right? It could be that, I know all of my settings are right, so I can consistently do this. But sometimes, maybe this is skipping a lunch every once in a while, right? And then what ends up happening is you end up being very, very, very ravenous later on. And then you get an overage when, had you had more regular meal intake, a breakfast, a lunch, a dinner, or, something similar, your appetite gets, I guess, better regulated.
Right.
You have intake, your body works through the fuel that you've put in. Oh, now it's, 4 or 5 hours later. Yep, I'm hungry again. That hunger signal too is often very disrupted in diabetes because of how we have to navigate food. And also because there is not the same regulation of insulin use as if your pancreatic, if your beta cells were producing. There's a very fine-tuned machine in there that we try to mimic as best we can as humans, but we're not doing it the same way.
Yeah, no, there's a lot in there. And I think the idea of just meal planning is important because here, we did not plan this, but have you eaten already this morning?
I have eaten this morning. Yes.
I haven't. Who do you think eats better, me or you? You. Okay. I'm not going to make you say it, right?
No debate
here. Do you know what you're having for dinner tonight?
We have as much of a plan usually in the week as we can, mainly because that's how I shop, is for knowing what's in the house and having an idea of what's going to be prepared. So
I don't, is what my point is. Okay. So I think that a little bit of planning goes a long way.
Sure.
I just really do. Even back to that. I love that story about when the time I asked you about road tripping, and I was like, well, don't you stop at gas stations and get candy bars? She's like, no. And I was like, well, what the hell do you eat on a long road trip? You're like, I bring food. And I was like, oh my God, what an awesome idea. I think that a little bit of planning can go a long, long way. I try to do it more. I'm not as good at it as other people are. I run a business completely by myself. There are days, the other day was one of them. I don't think I ate. I got up, I started working, I recorded twice. I got hungry. I went downstairs. I actually took food out, put it on the counter. Somebody called me. I ran back upstairs, and 2 hours later, my wife texted me and said, there's an egg on the counter. And I was like, oh, I didn't eat. That literally happened to me. So, you got to put some effort into it. I'm as guilty as everybody else. But
no, and that effort, it does go a long way. And from the standpoint of being a caregiver for kiddos, I try to keep that planning in place, because I think a big piece of why I do it, not only because I have diabetes, maybe I would have learned it, but my parents just planned that way as well, right? So there was a piece of influence in the caregiving, or the caretaking my parents had for myself and my brother. But I hope to provide that to my kids as well, that if we are out someplace, I try really hard to have things along, because then the idea of, Mom, can't we just stop there? Or can't we just go there? Or can't we just grab something from here?
It's so easy.
You know, I hope to instill that in them, that they can have some preparation and keep what I've been feeding them in their life.
I watch it like, my son is a pretty healthy eater, honestly. And yet if there's no food like there, what they go to is it's such a drop off so quickly. Like, no kidding. Like, and it goes right to, we could DoorDash something. We can go here. We can do, it's too easy to get credit. I mean, let's just be honest, right? Like, some food is great and some food is just, it's
not great.
Yeah, it's not great. And then not great food is super easy to get. So
it is. Yeah. Entirely. Yeah. Anyway, yeah. Absolutely.
Right, do your best. I'll talk to you guys later.
Okay.
The podcast episode that you just enjoyed was sponsored by Eversense CGM. They make the Eversense 365. That thing lasts a whole year. One insertion every year? Come on. You probably feel like I'm messing with you, but I'm not. EversenseCGM.com/juicebox. A huge thanks to my longest sponsor, Omnipod. Check out the Omnipod 5 now with my link, omnipod.com/juicebox. You may be eligible for a free starter kit, a free Omnipod 5 starter kit at my link. Go check it out. Omnipod.com/juicebox. Terms and conditions apply. Full terms and conditions can be found at omnipod.com/juicebox. Arden has been getting her diabetes supplies from US Med for 3 years. You can as well. usmed.com/juicebox or call 888-721-1514. My thanks to US Med for sponsoring this episode and for being longtime sponsors of the Juicebox Podcast. There are links in the show notes and links at juiceboxpodcast.com to US Med and all of the sponsors. Thank you so much for listening. I'll be back very soon with another episode of the Juicebox Podcast. If you're not already subscribed or following the podcast in your favorite audio app like Spotify or Apple Podcasts, please do that now. Seriously, just to hit follow or subscribe will really help the show. If you go a little further in Apple Podcasts and set it up so that it downloads all new episodes, I'll be your best friend. And if you leave a 5-star review, I'll probably send you a Christmas card. My Diabetes Pro Tip series is about cutting through the clutter of diabetes management to give you the straightforward, practical insights that truly make a difference. This series is all about mastering the fundamentals, whether it's the basics of insulin, dosing adjustments, or everyday management strategies that will empower you to take control. I'm joined by Jenny Smith, who is a diabetes educator with over 35 years of personal experience, and we break down complex concepts into simple, actionable tips. The Diabetes Pro Tip series runs between episode 1000 and 1025 in your podcast player, or you can listen to it at juiceboxpodcast.com by going up into the menu. Hey, what's up, everybody? If you've noticed that the podcast sounds better and you're thinking like, how does that happen? What you're hearing is Rob at Wrong Way Recording doing his magic to these files. So if you want him to do his magic to you, wrongwayrecording.com. You got a podcast? You want somebody to edit it? You want Rob.